Welcome back to Trauma, Drama, and Life. I am your host, Kayla Taylor.
And I'm Ben Taylor, and we're super excited to be back here. This is episode number 10 of this season of Trauma, Drama, and Life, and we're super excited about it. As this episode comes out, this will be the 10th one, and it'll be a total of 2 months that we've actually been having the podcast go. And everybody's been super gracious and super amazing, just writing in, letting us know how much you guys appreciate our vulnerability and talking through a lot of different things. In the matter of 2 months, we've had almost 8,000 plays of people just listening to a couple of the episodes. Absolutely kind of blew our minds. We were expecting people to want to know the information, but we weren't really expecting it to be really crazy.
Maybe expecting 10.
right. You thought your family, my family, and 2 other people, But just want to say thank you guys so much. Everybody's been really gracious, and we've been able to get a lot of good feedback from everybody. So thank you so much. We're going to be diving into this episode on a couple different things. We're going to touch on vulnerability, starting off with a couple other things, just some life updates, and then giving you an idea of a conclusion of this season that we're going to be posting for Trauma, Drama, and Life, and also a reboot of the season coming next year. So wanted to give you a couple of heads up, so stick around. Anyways, as we dive in today, we're going to be talking about the super fun topic of vulnerability. Okay. One of the things that everybody loves to see in other people, but nobody loves to exemplify themselves because it's scary. It's not something that I think anybody enjoys or anybody likes, but especially nobody likes when we're talking about trauma or when we're talking about narcissism. There's definitely huge aspects that vulnerability is very scary and awful. And so we had a couple people write in asking about vulnerability, so we wanted to touch base on it. And kind of first off, I'm going to bounce it over to Kayla, just along the idea of being vulnerable, before, as we got married, and then how did vulnerability for you change, throughout marriage, throughout the stuff that I did? What was your perspective of vulnerability, and how did it change?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I've never been a vulnerable person. Vulnerability is just, weird for me. And, it's just something that's obviously very uncomfortable, and I'm not very vulnerable with a lot of people. It comes with just the trust aspect. I really have to trust somebody in order for me to actually open up and be vulnerable. And so in the beginning of our relationship, I started to test the waters with vulnerability and kind of see where things would go. And I think through dating, I was a lot more vulnerable with Ben than when we got married. And when the things started happening, our first year of marriage, it basically started destroying all of that trust that was built. At that time, he hadn't cheated or anything, but it was just the actions of if I would come to him with something and be vulnerable, and he would knock it down, or it would start an argument or something, then in return I just wouldn't want to be vulnerable. I would start
to you.
Yeah.
Right.
I would start only half telling something, not necessarily lying, but I would just kind of sum it all up in a nutshell versus being these are my actual feelings, and I'm deeply hurt by this. I would just be yeah, I'm a little frustrated because of this, but it's not a big deal. I would just kind of shake it off and be on my merry way.
Yeah. How do you feel it started to change and transform a little bit now? And then the one question we had goes into the idea of how is it changing now? But then also, what do you do, or the things that you do to remind me, when or if I'm not vulnerable?
So how it's changed now is we've talked about this, I guess in our counseling sessions a couple of weeks ago. We talked about how on a scale of where we were vulnerability wise and connectivity wise and
safety wise, I think.
Yeah, safety. Yeah, because safety also plays a huge part in vulnerability. If you don't feel safe with your person, then you're not going to be vulnerable with them.
Right.
And we at that time were both saying 70-ish, 65, 70-ish %, because there is still that aspect that's still in your mind of the past hurts that have been caused in the past by cheating or the gaslighting or manipulation or whatever. And I've done a lot of work to be more confident in myself and knowing that this is how I feel. And if you don't like it, then that's on you as a person. That's not on me, because my feelings like I am allowed to have feelings in one sense, and I'm allowed to be vulnerable, and if you take it, then you take it. If not, then you have to work on that yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has gotten a lot easier, and it is getting to where sometimes it's still a little scary. But I still make that effort because I see consistent change within Ben. And
Right.
as far as
Vulnerability is always scary in my
yeah,
book.
yeah, and for him it's always scary, and I just try to remind him, like if I know that there's something on his mind, or if there's something that he's wanting to tell me or something like that, I don't push, because I'm like, you're a grown man. Like if you want to come to me and talk to me about something, I'm not going to play this like back and forth baby, like tell me, tell me, tell me. Like I'm going to say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm a safe space. You can tell me."
Because that's what I wanted early on too. Is
Right.
I wanted you to chase so that I could feel better about myself
Right.
and the stuff that I was feeling of like chase after me, and then you chase after me and I'd be like, go away,
Right.
that kind
And
of
it
thing.
would be like this back and forth of like, okay, well, I did chase after you, but you're still not telling me. So what's the point of me wasting quote unquote my time?
So you didn't chase long enough. Like that was like the thought process of like you gave up after 30 times. I meant you were supposed to go 34 times.
And so it just became
Yeah.
this like childish game. And in
Mm-hmm.
the end, like, so now I just tell him, hey, if you want to tell me something, then I'm here. I'm not going to force you to tell me. It's on you to, in one sense, like have the courage to come to me and talk to me about it.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's scary too, just because of the fact of like, I think like first off, the like we were around like 60-70% or whatever whenever we were
Mm-hmm.
talking to our counselor, and that has changed from,
Oh yeah,
early on.
yeah,
Those early scores were what, like
5%.
yeah,
like,
I was gonna
like it
say that,
was
yeah,
that
like they were
good.
very very low, and so like the fact of it changing as much as what it has, I think is pretty crazy and incredible, and like even we've been surprised along the path and along the journey of like seeing more aspects of being vulnerable, and some of those aspects of getting it broken down even in my mind to understand that sometimes I was fearing an outcome that wasn't even going to happen, but because I was projecting something onto you, I was like, I can't be vulnerable because you're going to respond this way. When in reality, you wouldn't have responded that way, but I didn't know. I
Mm-hmm.
had my mind made up of how you're going to respond, anyways.
Right.
So that was definitely like a big part of it. I think for me, a big aspect of vulnerability. I mean, vulnerability is terrifying. I normally call it like honesty 2.0. Like it's like you have to be honest, past and present, and then you have to be vulnerable. For a narcissist, past vulnerability a lot of times is fake, and a lot of times it's meant to be able to get people's empathy. And so for me, I view honesty 2.0 being the vulnerability like in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Being vulnerable about how I feel or how I interact, and I would say I'm doing better on that, but I'm definitely not. I definitely haven't arrived or anything like
Right.
that because
Right.
it's still it's very scary and very terrifying. And there's aspects that sometimes I'll communicate stuff to you after I've already talked about it like in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've already had like I don't know, almost like a sounding board of like, hey, here's me being vulnerable, and then like we work through it, and then I'm like, okay, now I can go talk to you and be vulnerable. But there's also been back and forth where it's kind of been both ways.
Right.
So,
And I think the one thing too is like people listening in, they're probably gonna ask like or be like, well, why are you still with him if he's not vulnerable? And it's not that he's not vulnerable or not vulnerable enough. It's just he is still working on himself. He's only really been in therapy for like it'll be 2 years in February of
2 years coming up, yeah.
2023. So he's still fairly new in his healing journey. Like while he has done a lot of healing because he's done a lot of work on different aspects as far as therapy and doing different things with like just some self reflections and diving into his faith and all that
Mhm.
stuff, like there's still a lot more room for growth as well. And so I think that as long as I consistently see him trying to open up, and that's why I'm emphasizing being consistent, and we've talked about this before, is
Mhm.
that consistent change and that consistent aspect. It's not like he's just like half doing it. He's consistently putting in a little bit more effort, and each week I can tell that he's like, even though it's uncomfortable for him, he is trying to share a little bit more or trying to open up a little bit and test the waters to see if it is like safe and things
Yeah.
like that, because he's
And it's hard to build that trust on both our sides. I mean, perfect example literally is today.
Yeah.
Like I got up early and I'm working on, going through and like stacking some stuff. And I get to the place where I'm going through a specific topic that I'm like, okay, this is something I need to work on. And then you wake up and you're like, this is on my mind. And it's literally the exact same topic.
Like I had a dream about the topic that he was stacking
Right.
about.
And you're like, this is the exact same topic. And in my mind, it was like, this is something that I was planning on talking to you on like date night. And in my mind, I was like, it'd be super easy just to wait until then. But I wanted to try to be vulnerable and establish a connection of like, hey,
Right.
that's something that I was just thinking about and like processing too. But then it comes to like trust of like, we don't have time to sit down and talk through all this just because of stuff going on today. So it's like you have to trust that I'm gonna bring it up on date night, and
Right.
like I've also tried to step out there with a little bit of vulnerability of like, hey, this is actually something that I've been going through too. In another way to kind of be accountable of like, hey, I want to be able to talk to you about this.
Right.
But like that was like a vulnerable moment that I know consciously went through my mind of like, I remember I got the text from you and I remember looking at it and being like, do I want to like say this now or say this then? And I was like, let me say it now, even if it. And I mean, for the first like couple minutes, there's some like almost like tension. There's some like worry in one sense of
Right.
like,
Just because it is like the thing that we were talking about was a little bit triggering. So
right.
it was
And without us being able to have a an hour long conversation or whatever,
right.
it just wasn't very practical. But I was like, I wanted to at least connect with you of like, hey, this is something.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of leads into like one of the things the question came out of like what do I do to try to work on being vulnerable and do that consistently. And a huge aspect of a lot of things that I do that's really changed my perspective and my engagement goes back to the Wake Up Warrior challenge that I did and then being a part of Wake Up Warrior, because the stuff that I do every single day is me engaging with feelings and emotions, like all those icky things that otherwise, if I didn't have that tool, I wouldn't engage with.
Right.
And so with Warrior, there's an aspect that's called stacking that actually goes through your emotions, your feelings, the story you're telling yourself. And a lot of the stuff I work with clients is the same stuff. Like it's the same stuff, just sometimes smaller versions because they don't know the ins and outs of like Warrior. But those are what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so I had a huge decision, a week or so ago that, we were both talking and praying about. And for me, like I got up early and I stacked. I ended up doing, I think it was like 4 stacks that day to be able to reach a conclusion of what I was processing, feeling, and thinking. And then even like today, it was like 3 or 4 stacks today, which I mean, a typical stack is like at least like 20 to 30 minutes is not really like super fast, and sitting with it so that helps because then from a stack I can be like, hey, let me copy a link and send it to you, and you're able to
Right.
see what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. And oftentimes it can be a way either as like a check-in of like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or it can be a way as a conversation starter too.
Yeah. And early on, especially when we were trying to like connect and like rebuild that vulnerability and that safety aspect to even attack, I shouldn't say attack is probably the wrong word, but handle conflict.
Mm-hmm.
If he would get upset at me, he would like just do a stack about it and send it to me. And sometimes it would be like very like frustrating because I'm like, you're doing a stack about me. Like, but at the same time, like the questions that is answered, it gets into like different aspects of like what is the lie that he's telling me about this like conversation or argument that we're having, like what is the lie he's telling himself about that, and then what is the conclusion and how can we come back together and like talk about it in a calm manner.
Right. And we've got like a very small, like dumbed down version, but a small version of that inside the NARCAT for people to actually process triggers. That's the whole idea of like dealing with the triggers. And I kind of gave like a little heads up to some people that we're going to eventually get hopefully those same tools, the powerful tools, the big ones in one sense, with just our platform and stuff like that down the road. So super excited about that. But that's a little bit on vulnerability. But the crazy part is being vulnerable at times, obviously is scary, but being vulnerable opens us up for sometimes hurt, frustration, and online especially a lot of hate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Needless to say, one of the videos recently, at the time of this recording, recently on TikTok went a little viral, and that was me being vulnerable about supply, because people asked like, what about like your previous supplies? Did your wife know the people that you cheated on with. And I was like, yes. And like went into not a ton of detail, but went into a little detail that you did know,
Right.
4 out of the 5 you knew personally. And everybody came out of the woodwork. I feel like at least like 50% of everybody who watched it or more probably were brand new to the platform. So they had no clue that
Right.
like I've already talked about cheating on my wife. I've already talked about this has been something confessed, working through in therapy, counseling, like all this different stuff. But a lot of people came out of the woodwork and said a lot of mean comments about me,
And also just even
and
about
also about
me,
you. Yeah,
like
yeah, like, and it's crazy because people want to see change. There's a lot of people that they want to see, their spouse, their significant other, like do the work, be honest, consistent, and start changing. But then when I start putting out there, like, hey, this is what I'm doing, they're like, well, screw you, you should go to hell,
right.
And then everybody also came at you, being like, well, either you're a narcissist because you stayed with a narcissist, or you're weak and you don't know your worth, and that's why you're still there. Someone I think said like you're doing the world a public service because you're taking care of this narcissist versus like letting me out in the
Right.
in the world. But yeah, so I mean, talk a little bit about. I mean, it's vulnerable from my standpoint to put that out there because when I made that video, I did like pause of like, do I actually want to record this video and in this depth? And I was like, for me, I think that's the next level on my platform is being more transparent.
Right.
Not that I haven't been, but I mean, again, vulnerability is honesty 2.0.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, because I think a lot of people would like to hear your perspective on hearing or seeing some of those comments and how that feels, either with me putting my vulnerability out there or at times you putting vulnerability out there, even vicariously trusting me
Hmm.
as I put information out there. What are
Yeah,
your
because that
thoughts?
also then we made one together, and people came for me because I
Hmm.
was being sarcastic, and then they like came for the both of us, thinking that he was like hiding his platform,
Oh
and
yeah, you said, oh yeah, because I didn't know
because
you
I
had a
didn't know you had a
platform.
platform, like being
Right.
very sarcastic. And if you know me, you know that like I am sarcastic at times, and
Hmm.
so I was just like, okay, well maybe I shouldn't have been sarcastic, like
Nobody on TikTok got it. Everybody else, I feel like all the other platforms got it,
yeah.
but TikTok was just like,
I think maybe because it was already like that one video was such like so much hate, and then they
right.
just like saw that one,
They were like,
that
blink
the
three
only
times.
video
Yeah.
like response. Yeah. So it was like, it was very interesting. But it's like we were talking about this, and I was telling Ben that these comments would have affected me so much differently a year to a year and a half ago. Like when he was first starting his platform, like for me, it was very exposing when he first started this, but I knew that it was something that God was calling him to do. So I had to also really pray about it of like, God, like what, like obviously you're calling him to share his story, to help people or whatever it may be. And like at the time we did not realize that it was going to take off like how it has, and we're so incredibly grateful and thankful. And I knew that he like that's what the Lord was calling him to do. And so I had to just trust that the Lord had a plan. And so but it was still very exposing because it's like
Mhm.
you're sharing your story with the world, and at that time a lot of people didn't really know our story,
Right.
even a lot of our close friends.
Yeah.
Um where we didn't have like we would tell them like more of an overview versus like the nitty-gritty of the relationship.
Hmm.
And so through that, I have grown. And then when we separated, I did a lot of like healing and like diving more into my faith and like just kind of like breaking out of that like bond of like feeling like we had to be like he was like an idol almost. And I've
Hmm.
talked about this in a previous podcast as well. And so just breaking free of that, of knowing that this is a part of our story, and whether we stayed together or not, it would have always been a part of my story.
Hmm.
And I shouldn't be ashamed of that because God has brought me through this for a specific reason. And so then fast forward to like this time last year, it would have still affected me because I actually had a platform trying to,
On TikTok, yeah.
yeah, on TikTok.
Hmm.
And one of my videos went viral. Like it was like probably like the third or the fourth video that I had posted on TikTok. It went viral.
Hmm.
And on that specific video, it was like, um,
a decent
it
amount of
was a
hate.
decent amount of hate of
Right.
like saying I must be the narcissist. There was people even DMing me on my Instagram saying, "Why aren't you talking about your narcissism on this platform? Because you talk about it on TikTok." And I'm like, I'm not the narcissist. Like,
Right.
it's not me. And so it kind of made me step back from that platform for a while, and then I just kept receiving so much hate of like, he's not going to ever change, like, you're just so trauma bonded, you're just this, you're just this, you're just this, and people just projecting their feelings onto me. And
Basically
so
calling you an idiot for being with me.
right. And
Yeah.
so at that point, because I was still like, while I had done a lot of healing, I was still healing. I was
Mm.
basically like, though this it's kind of like a gory way of thinking about it, but it's like the wound was like scabbed over, and so anything could easily like nick it and like reopen it. And
Mm.
so it was like the wound needed to completely heal
Yeah.
before I was ready to step up into that. And so that is why we started this podcast, because then I was like ready to be like, okay, I'm ready to take that next step in being vulnerable, because obviously this podcast is being vulnerable. It's exposing our relationship
Right.
together. And so,
But you don't see any hate, and there's no
right,
comment at the top, which is nice.
exactly. So,
Right.
but at the same time, like, I know that when he was reading off some of those comments, I didn't go and I didn't look at every single one of those comments, because
But you
some
were
of them
laughing pretty good
probably,
on some of them.
yeah,
For
some
sure.
of them probably would have gotten to me, but I was laughing pretty good. And on the ones that I made, like the TikToks that I made with him, I did look at them and I was just like, it was just comical, because there was even somebody who was like, well, I don't understand why she needs to be in therapy, or why she needs to work on
Yeah, if he's
herself.
the one that
If
cheated, why
he's the
did she
one,
need therapy?
right? Like, it was just
Yeah,
some of the comments were just like, really,
that
like,
was the Instagram idiot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, why
Yeah.
would you, why? But
Yeah, but I mean, there's definitely a big aspect on any platform of being vulnerable. Feels like uncomfortable because it's a big aspect of exposure,
mm-hmm.
and that's something that we've been more exposed than normal on social media, and then also just in our regular life. So not too many people know, but we've actually made a transition in our lives because we were exposed, as far as it's called doxing, when someone actually puts your address out there in the public. Someone is actually doing that, canvassing, putting out letters and flyers, and saying stuff about us, and then also exposing our address and our names and our daughter and everything like that. So there's a
Yeah.
huge aspect that
It's one thing. It's kind of like it's like the Mama Bear and Papa Bear came out. It's one thing if you want to come after us, but when you come after our daughter, then it's like,
right.
we're done.
So yeah, um, a long story short, we got to a place where we felt like our physical safety was under question, and so
Mm-hmm.
we had another issue, another letter that showed up that we were viewed as being too threatening to ignore, and so we turned around and rented a U-Haul, and 75 hours later, we were pulling out of our house with our entire house packed up.
And our house on the market.
Yeah. So excessively crazy, excessively fast, and we're taking much higher precautions as we move, just because the nature of my job puts us in the realms of working with a lot of survivors who deal with a lot of toxic people that sometimes can be not just narcissists, but psychopaths and sociopaths. So,
Right.
Yeah, so that's next level stuff that we're being careful of. Anyways, talking about exposure, that was a huge part of exposure that now we're making a life transition to live in a different place and kind of moving on from there. So we wanted to give you that life update. I know it's
Yes.
a little crazy, and it's been very crazy, and we're waiting for craziness to slow down here
Yeah.
in the next couple months. But that kind of leads us to the fact of coming up on that craziness, and then also the holidays coming up.
Yeah. We have Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
Christmas, and the New Year.
New Year's, yep. So I wanted to announce we're actually going to be wrapping up this season.
With this episode.
Yep, I know, tear, surprise. But we're actually going to be wrapping it up. So we're going to be 10 episodes in this first season, number 1. However, we are going to be coming back with season number 2, so don't fret.
Yes.
The cool thing is season number 2 is going to be coming back sometime in January. I don't have a date for it, but it's coming back sometime in January. And it is also going to have video with it as well. So whether that means we actually do video on the podcast platform, or we'll do video on YouTube and have the podcast that'll be what we'll be looking at. But it'll actually be recorded on video, so you can see our lovely faces
Yes.
when we're messing up and bumbling over our words. And then we're excited to announce, because Kayla's been talking about it for a little bit, but she's actually going to start joining me at least once a month inside the NARC app to be able to answer specific questions and thoughts and things like that for people there who are going through their healing process and trying to work through different things. She's a great resource as far as just her own healing journey and stuff that's transpired and that she's had to work through, and she wants to be able to provide that resource to people there. We're not doing it public like everywhere else, just because again we're still trying to be careful and figure out like a good rhythm of how we want to engage with the hate comments and stuff like that
Right.
as we get used to it. And so the NARC app is a great way to be able to start building that confidence, but also provide as a resource. So typically we go live technically 3 weeks out of the month. The fourth one is our monthly coaching call, which is a Zoom call all across the globe. And so one of those three weeks in the month, she's going to start going live with me and answering questions on the live, answering questions people can write in and ask different questions inside the NARC app. So if that's something you're interested in and want to be able to see that coming up here, that's going to be in mid-December.
Yeah, because we have vacations, and then we're still moving in the
Right.
moving process.
Yeah,
like all
so
of that.
that's going to be mid-December. That's going to start. So in a month, she'll be on the NARC app, and we'll announce that inside the NARC app of when that's happening. If you don't know anything about the NARC app, it stands for Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Community, and you can get access to it and also see what all is involved in it if you go to narcapp.com. I'll see about putting the link in the episode bio as well. But anyways, that's what we got today. Thank you all for hanging out, and also the life update that put us a little bit longer than normal.
And also, like, as we wrap this up, we'll still be posting on our social media platforms like throughout the next couple months. So if you guys want to keep up with us there, I have a YouTube channel that's more lifestyle, like vlogs. So it's not about narcissism. So if you want to see our day-to-day life or what we're up to in the next couple months,
then check that out, because that'll be good for sure. And then we'll be back in January with videos, and also us going podcast, not live inside the app next month, and then January podcast with video. So hopefully we'll see you guys then.
Yeah. Happy holidays. Hope you guys have a good, safe holiday as well. And we'll see you guys in the new year.